So this week we're going to talk about admiration and intentional contact, and we're going to kind of talk mostly kind of in the framework of marriage, but this is also true with your children, the kind of intentional contact we need, and also remembering those moments, um, those good moments that will carry you through the difficult moments, and there are plenty of them both in marriages and in parenting. But remembering that fondness. I think one of the books I was reading, it is, oh yeah, I can just, Seven Principles for Making Marriage Work. Um, Dr. Gottman says in his study, fondness is the primary and most important aspect of healthy and holy marriages. Um, that is the underlying factor that he sees almost, he says, without exception, in marriages that fail. It is when a loss of an ability to recognize the good times and they've lost that fondness for one another. He said, but for any couples that would come into his office, if there is a glimmer of hope, if you could ask them a question about the other and you can see just a little bit of a glimmer left, he said, I've never had a marriage like that wasn't able to be saved if they had just a littlest desire to be with one another. So it says a lot about fondness for one another, and the power that it has to propel us to do things in those relationships. So do you remember the first time you met your spouse? I remember like it was yesterday. I remember the first time I saw Heather. We were sitting in chapel at Neat Week at Oklahoma Christian. We were in Scott Chapel. I was wearing a John Michael Montgomery denim shirt, cut off sleeves with frayed edges. And I had long curly hair. And she was sitting back here with a bunch of her friends. My own, yes. Yeah, it was kind of mullet style, actually. It was, no, it wasn't mullet style. It was a mullet. Well, I was 18, so you would say adult, you know. I remember the first time we spoke. I was getting ice cream at the machine in the cafeteria at Oklahoma Christian, and Heather walked up behind me and she said, "Hey, I like your shirt." And I looked at her and I said, "Thanks. My mom made it," and walked off. There's a whole story behind why I walked off. I thought she had a boyfriend, or at least had somebody that she was around, so I didn't even think twice about it. I remember our first date, McDonald's and the dollar show at North Park Mall. We really splurged. I got the double quarter pounder because we went extra, so we got special. My wisdom teeth were coming in, so I asked for all the crunchy fries so I could make my gums feel better. I remember the movie, The Prophecy. Terrible movie, but it was the only thing that was showing to get us back in time for curfew. And it was $1 at North Park Mall. There's a lot of stories I could tell you, and every one of them you would go, how in the world did she stay around with all of those? Do you remember the first time you brought your kids home from the hospital? Like, I remember the day the nurse came by and said, "Hey, do you have a car seat?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's right here." She goes, "It's not doing any good right there. It needs to be in the car." It's like, oh. So then I put it in the car, and I remember when that realization of, oh, we've got to take this home, and there's not somebody just to call right away. I remember those first moments in our hospital room. I wanted it to be me and Heather and our little baby boy. And I don't know how her family knew that that baby was born, because I didn't tell them. And I know Heather didn't tell them because she was in the C-section. But when we got back to our room, it was full. And it's like, this is not what I asked for. And she had a block, so she was dead from her shoulders down. And everybody wanted to hold Dustin, first grandbaby. And they're like, oh, can we hold him? Can we hold him? Can we hold him? And I'm like, no, 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 no. And so finally, someone said, can I hold him? And I said, his mom hasn't even got a chance to hold her, and nobody's holding this baby until his mom gets to hold him. So, no. And that's about what it sounded like in the hospital room. It got really quiet, really fast. Everybody just sat against the wall. And I can, like, when I tell those stories, and it's just like I'm right there. Those things that we remember that made us fall in love with that being that is in front of us. The jokes that were made, the feelings that we had. I remember the smell of our hospital room. I remember the little blanket that they were all wrapped up in. I can almost hear the sound of the machines beeping around. I remember the people that came to visit us in those moments. And I remember those first moments at home as we learned my dad and mom were right. Babies are hard, and you don't know what they're crying for a while. And then our son called and said, hey, what did you do to make me stop crying the first week I was born? It's like, we just put you down and walked away sometimes, son. I remember those moments. Sometimes when we live our lives, all of those fond, joyful, happy memories sometimes become sad. What makes fond memories turn into sad memories? Can't recreate them. Lost time. The thought that there won't be more made.
Right? Like
Yeah.
when somebody dies, what makes the memory sad is there won't be more memories to make. Like what
Yeah.
the saying, right?
Yeah.
Can't make more.
That's right. I saw and it was a meme that I saw, and it says, did you ever think that one day you're going to pick up your child and set them down and you're never going to pick them up again? I was like, whew. Like, maybe you want to go pick up all of our kids one more time just to say I did. But there's that time that's lost and you can't ever do it again. And sometimes it's because you're in a new phase of life. Sometimes it's because people are gone. And maybe there's times where memories just can't be made again. I love the movie Inside Out. Anybody seen the movie Inside Out? Anybody not seen the movie Inside Out? All right. Well, if you haven't seen the movie Inside Out, there is this character named Joy, and she is bright. She's got big blue hair. She's full of energy, and she is in charge of all these happy memories. And this girl has been moved by her family from one place to a whole another state. And as she's remembering all of her happy memories of playing hockey, they now become sad memories because all of those friends are gone. All those connections are gone. She doesn't have the same friends that are in her new school or in her new neighborhood. And all of these core memories that were so joyful kind of begin turning sad. And there's one point in the movie where Joy's holding this memory, and it's blue, or it's bright yellow, and it's happy. And every time the sad character touches it, they turn blue. And she's like, stop touching my memories. You're making them all sad. And at the end of the movie, you see that they're all kind of a mixture of yellow and blue marbled. Because life experiences sometimes make us see those things in through very different lenses. With our kids and with our marriages, sometimes what happens is all we can see is the new lens that looks back and all it can even recognize the joyful moments. Life plays these dirty tricks on us and brings us a new set of glasses to see our past through that shapes and shades everything, if we will allow it to. And we sometimes lose the ability to hold two realities in tension, which is there are good things and there are bad things. And the challenge is to learn how to allow those two things to exist in the same moment at the same time. So when our kids are acting up, we say, man, we've got some good kids, but man, they're on my last nerve today. What does the word but mean in that sentence? When we use it that way, my kids are so good, but it negates the good that we just stated, right? So instead of saying my kids are so good, but I love my wife, but I love my husband, but what if we learned to live by and use and instead? My kids are so good and they're on my last nerve. Both can be true at the same time. I love my wife and we're not really seeing eye to eye right now. I love my husband and he needs to get out of this room before I wring his neck. Both can be true at the same time in the same moment, and we don't have to negate the good to acknowledge what's going on. I'll share a case in point from our life just recently because it's fresh on my mind. We're remodeling a house. I don't recommend that for anybody. It will test your marriage all sorts of different ways. We're working on the kitchen. We were in this, we got some good stuff done. Everything got clean for Heather's mom to come. And once it got clean, I was like, oh, you know what? This is pretty good. It's not finished. There's still a lot of work to do, but man, it feels good because everything's in place. So we could just take a little break for a little while. I was still on break mode. Heather was not on break mode, right? All the holidays are gone. We're kind of back in a rhythm. School's back in. We're back at work. So I said, we were talking about finishing up the backsplash, and I said, I'll work on that on Friday. Well, Friday came. I didn't work on the backsplash. I didn't do nothing. I actually did a whole lot of stuff. I swept and mopped the living room. I cleaned up all the mess that my dog had made in the living room, all the muddy footprints, steam cleaned the floors there in the dining room. I finished putting up the trim or trimmed the dining room area. I got a lot of stuff swept and mopped. We cleaned the bedrooms and made all the beds. And I went through Dylan's room. And there was a lot of stuff done. But the backsplash wasn't done. And we had plans for a date on Friday night. And so Heather comes home and she walks in the door. And as soon as she walks in, I'm like, what's going on here? That's not the reaction I expected to have. I expected to walk in and go, oh, you got the crown molding up. That's awesome. And man, look, all of Wally's junk is picked up. That's awesome. She said, I thought you were working on the backsplash today. I was like, well, I did something different. She goes, you didn't think that you should tell me that you did something different? I was ready to see it done. I was like, I didn't know it was that big of a deal. It's like, how could you know it was not? How could you not know it was that big of a deal? You said. I was like, I know what I said. I had a change of mind. Am I not allowed to change my mind? Oh, yes, of course you're allowed to change your mind, but some information would be nice. And so, what did I do? I started doing the backsplash. And we got to about 5 o'clock and I said, hey, are we still going to Tyler tonight? And she says, sure, if you want to. So I did the backsplash Friday night. She wasn't very happy with me. That could have been easily avoided if I would. And I said, I'm sorry that I didn't realize how important that was to you. And she said, now look, I said, hey, I don't need you to continue to expound. I know what I messed up. I am sorry that I did not know how important that was to you. I should have known. I should have been better. In that moment, the fondness was still there. It was just harder to find. And I could have said, "Oh, you said sure. Well, let's go on to Tyler. We're going to go to the can't remember the name of the place, Texas Music City Grill or something. They had some live music there. We're going to have dinner, listen to some music." I could have done that. That probably would have been the most miserable date we had been on in 26 years. And I could have done that. But in her mind, both were true. I love this man, but he needs to get to work and get out of my face right now, because she was not happy. If we don't acknowledge those moments when they come up and deal with them appropriately, then one after another builds up this resentment. So that when we look back on those moments that used to make us happy, all we see is what was lost, and we don't see a way back to it anymore. And so the importance of fondness, that's not what Song of Solomon 4 says, by the way. And that's, I guess I forgot to do those. I forgot to put the actual scriptures on there. Song of Solomon chapter 4 talks about pursuing the bride of my youth, and how there is this constant pursuit of, it's not just, hey, all right, I've got my bride and now then I'm done pursuing. That pursuit is a constant presence in a marriage. It's also a constant presence in your relationship with your children. We need to constantly pursue our kids, because part of that is, as we go through that relationship, we are teaching and training them on how it is to live in healthy relationship with people that we love. And a big part of the people that we love is how we pursue greater knowledge of who they are. We talked about love maps a few weeks ago, and how much those change. And if we're not continuing to pursue those people, we don't even realize how the people in our lives have changed. Fondness and admiration, we said it before, I'll say it again, are two of the most crucial elements in a rewarding and long-lasting marriage. To be able to find those moments, and sometimes we got to revisit them a lot. Counseling other couples is good for Heather and I, because we get to go back and tell those stories, and it reminds us of where we've been. I'm grateful. I was talking to one of my professors last week in a class. They were asking about how we raised children. And, when I told him kind of our practice and our habit about different things, he said, that's really uncommon. He said, did that come from your parents or Heather's? And I said, well, it really came from neither. And not by any of their fault. It was just a different time. Heather and I were blessed to be a part of a program right after we got married. And I think we were the first class to go through this class at Oklahoma Christian, called Christian Marriage and Development. Right? Marriage Development or something like that. It was with Dr. McMillan, and going through that class as newlyweds just set us on a journey of just a constant pursuit of knowing more and more and more. And there was one moment where someone came in to talk to our class, and as he was talking to us, all of us newlyweds, all married less than 6 months, he said, your marriage is never safe. He said, the moment you think that you are exempt from the temptations and the trials that divide married couples is the moment you are most vulnerable to an attack. And that kind of just made me think, because there's been a lot of times in my life where I said, wow, that won't happen to me. We kind of live our lives that way. We see bad things happening, and we know bad things happen, and we just kind of assume, because this hasn't happened to me before, it's not going to happen to me now. Our son went to Japan, and within moments of him being over there, he sends us a video of him climbing up on this bridge and jumping, not off the bridge, jumping off of the arch of the bridge into the river down in Okinawa. And I was like, dude, I'm like, what? Like, you're not at home. You know that, right? I mean, I don't really necessarily trust the doctors on base or the hospitals on base. And I said, please don't get arrested and don't break your legs. And he goes, no, it's cool, Dad. The police stop traffic so they can watch us jump. Like, well, that doesn't make me feel any better. But I'm glad to know that there is some form of authority there to pull you out of the water if you do hurt yourself. But at that age you think, bad stuff happens. It's not going to happen to me. We see things happen in the lives and marriages and kids and all these things. And until it comes and we encounter it firsthand, we recognize the truth. And sometimes it catches us off guard. And so I appreciated that reminder to constantly be proactive. And that just kind of rolled over into the lives of our kids as well. And here's the issue with a loss of this fondness and admiration. And think about this. When you start losing your fondness for people, what happens? You have friends. First time you meet a friend, you think they do some things and they're pretty funny. They have little quirks about them, and then the more you get to know them, the more of those little quirks become annoyances. Our daughter is not able to keep roommates. Really never has been. She's never liked sleepovers, even as a little girl. She would say, so-and-so invited me over for a sleepover. I was like, oh, great, you want to go? And she's like, can you say no? Can you say I have to be home by 10:30, please? But she knew that about herself. And there was one camp, she went to camp with her best friend, and they roomed together in a cabin, and they realized they were great friends and almost sisters, but they were horrible roommates. And so they never roomed together again. Even when they went to camp, they roomed with other people and then just had a blast together. She went to college, and first roommate had a blast week 1, had a pretty good time week 2. By week 3, she was done. So then she went to Vienna. Vienna was good, for that second year, because you're in Europe. What can go wrong in Europe? If there's bad stuff going on in the house, like it's okay. Tomorrow we're going to Germany, or tomorrow we're going to whatever. They were just having the time of their lives. So she meets somebody, and they become roommates when they get back. And week 1 was great. Week 2 was not so great. And week 3, she was done. And she's like, hey, babe, you just got engaged over the fall, right? It's like, you realize you're about to get a roommate that you can't just be done with. She's like, yeah, I know, but he's different. Like, you've said that about the last 2 or 3, right? Because at first they're, those saying, oh man, they're cute, they're funny, everything's fine. But after a while, it's like, I can't live with this anymore. And when we lose that fondness, that's what happens, is those little annoyances, because now then, these are the things I used to laugh at. These are the things that I used to love about this person. These are the things that make them unique. I can't necessarily change that about them, but how do I express that? And so we don't express it. We just keep pressing it down and pressing it down and pressing it down until they do something or say something. And instead of going, oh, we look at them and go, oh. And it's almost a feeling of disgust. And so the challenge is to prevent those things from becoming points of resentment, which means we have to address them when they come up, which means we have to say, look, I love you, and I need you to put your dirty clothes in the dirty clothes hamper. I love you, and I need you to let me fold my own clothes. I fold my own clothes. If Heather does laundry, she just lays them on the bed. You know why? Because she got sick and tired of watching me refold clothes. I don't know why, but shirts need to be folded like this, like this, and like this. And socks need to be folded a certain way. And my jeans need to be folded a certain way because I don't want to take them out and have weird wrinkles through them. And I mean, yeah, it's weird. I know it's weird, but so she had a choice to make. She could either keep folding my clothes and then look at me every time I refolded them and go, I don't know why you refold those. You always refold those clothes. You think I don't fold clothes good enough? Or she could have just said, you know what? Your clothes are clean and now you can fold them. And we're both happier for it. We're both better off for it. So we have to make those choices to not allow those annoyances to turn into resentment. The same is true with our children. Like, our children will do things that drive us mad. And you can't fight every battle. Right? Everything can't be, it's my way or the highway. I've laid down the law and here it is and we're going by it. Otherwise, you spend all of your time fighting and none of your life living or training. And so in those moments, we have to learn, how do we take these things and turn them into learning opportunities or places where we can both find points of compromise, where we can learn to live together. And as much of a challenge as that is in marriage, it may be even a greater challenge when it comes to our kids. So finding ways of building bridges, and maybe it's not so much annoyances, but rules. You know, we had a rule in our house that there was no food allowed in the bedrooms. You don't eat in the bedrooms. You don't eat in the extra room. We had an extra bedroom that was kind of an office space and a guest room, sort of a couch that folded out into a bed. Then the kids had their own room, and so we gave them a lot of freedom, but no food in the bedroom. And when they got older, that was something we had to decide. Was that just going to be a little annoyance, or was that going to be a point where we had to put our foot down? Well, we put our foot down. You know why? We don't want bugs. And as we're cleaning out our daughter's room, it was like, Joe, figured out where all our spoons went. I don't know what you were stirring in your room because there weren't bowls or anything else in there, but we found a load of spoons. And then there's, we find wrappers in places in Dylan's room, or Lay's cans that are stacked up neatly in the corner because Lay's are his thing. It's like, look, those are moments we had to say, look, this is not going to happen. I'm not going to allow this. There are other moments where we had to say, we got to find an even place here. Like, if your room's going to stay a mess, you're a 17-year-old young man, that's fine. So, but here's the deal. I am only doing the laundry that's in the dirty clothes basket. So if you wake up and you have no clean clothes because all of your dirty clothes are on your bedroom floor, you're going to have to do laundry or wear dirty clothes to school. And Dylan might have chosen to wear dirty clothes to school. He probably didn't really care. And I don't know why it was hard, because he could either throw them in the floor or he could go and put them in the hamper. I mean, it really was literally 2 steps outside of his doorway. But we could either choose to allow that to be a point of contention that we were constantly fighting about, or just say, okay, here's the deal. This is your room. This is your space. There are going to be times and days where we're going to clean, but in the meantime, I'm not picking up your clothes off of your floor. To find those moments of to not allow it to become a point of resentment. Those are little things. They're easy things, but they're representative of how we can begin to make decisions along those lines, so that when it comes time to make decisions about big things, we've already laid a foundation for how we communicate and how we resolve issues. And I want to talk here about meaningful touch for just a moment. This is true in your marriages. This is true with your kids as well. 8 to 10 meaningful touches is the minimum that is required for us to feel healthy emotionally and physically in a relationship. So what is a meaningful touch? A hug? A kiss? Yeah, it could just it could just be something that's intentional, right? I mean, but it's not just a hey, all right, that's one, 7 to go, right? Gotcha. Um, but it could be something simple like that. Um, when you walk through the room, any room that your husband or your wife is in, do you make it a point to touch in any way? I mean, even if it's just, like you said, a pat on the shoulder, a hand on the shoulder, hey, a touch of a hand as you walk by, just an acknowledgement that, hey, you're here and I'm here. Um, when your kids come through, they need to know that you are present physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And that physical touch, just that intentional, hey, I see you, I love you. I wondered if our kids got tired of us hearing the words, I love you. But Dylan's not as much of a communicator as the other two, but the other two are grown. They're out of the house. They're both married. One has 2 kids. They're in Japan. Jody is in Oklahoma, and they do not get off the phone without saying, hey, I love you. And it's not just love you, bye. And if I'm not in the room when they're getting off the phone, or if I'm not sitting right there by Heather, because I just can't like sit and talk on the phone for a long time. Heather talks on the phone until the kids say, okay, I've got to go. Like Dustin sometimes will say, I got to go. It's about time for us to go. And she'll say, okay. And then she'll talk for another 20 minutes because she's not hanging up the phone until Dustin says bye or Jody says bye. I can't sit there for that long, so I'll get up and go do something else. And they'll say, love you, Mom. She'll say, I love you. And I'll hear him, love you, Pops. Like, love you guys. Intentional touch. We haven't done everything right with him. We've not been perfect parents. We don't have a perfect marriage. But there are things that we learned kind of the hard way coming up. And that intentional touch that says, I love you. Sometimes it is just a pat. Sometimes it is a touch of hands. Sometimes it's a touch on the shoulder. Sometimes it's a hug. Sometimes it's a kiss. It's not incidental. It is purposeful and it is intentional. And sometimes Heather will kind of walk through the room. She's got stuff in her hand, and I'll say, hey. And she goes, my hands are full. I was like, I don't care. Just come closer. Because it's just it's a symbol that I haven't lost a fondness for you. I love you. And sometimes life can seem like we are just 2 ships passing in the night. And when our kids were busy and they were in gymnastics and baseball and basketball, and they were going different places at different times, sometimes she would be here with one and I'd be there with the other. And we were all over the place. Sometimes it's just those moments in passing that you have for a little while, and life is busy and hectic and chaotic. And so you have to capitalize on those opportunities to intentionally be present. Oftentimes they said you need to find a date night. Sometimes date night is impossible to find. But can you learn how to steal moments of a day? I got 2 kids playing, I got one eating, and I got one doing homework. It's like, I got 3 minutes. Can we sit for 3 minutes and just be present here with one another? To preserve those things. Sometimes it is just a moment that we have. So being intentional. Our kids know when they're upset, when we're upset with them. Like, I knew when I was getting punished because the belt or the paddle came out. I understood that was an intentional touch. But that even was meaningful because I knew what was going on in the moment, and I knew that my dad was lying when he said, this is going to hurt me worse than it hurts you. I remember getting licks at school in Garden City, and I remember the day they changed the policy to having to get parental permission. And I went to the principal's office, and he picked up the phone. I was like, "Who are you calling?" He goes, "I'm calling your dad." I'm like, "You don't have to call my dad." He said, "We have to call your parents before you get licks." I'm like, "You don't have to call my parents. I give you permission." It's like, if I get 3 here, I'm getting 6 at home. I'll take the 3 here. Okay. I don't need the return on investment in this moment. But I knew even those moments of discipline were moments of love, and they were intentional. They were meaningful. Those are very important aspects of those. Um, so here's what I want us to be in a regular practice of. Uh, Anybody in here married over 40 years? 45? You over 50? 55. That's awesome. Why am I teaching this class? Where's James? I only have so many stories to tell. Like, are we going to like run out of things to talk about? The first year was fine. Second year was fine. And then after a while, I'm like, what are we going to talk about? Like, I'm going to be around this person all day, every day of the week. Like, how boring is this going to be with the same person every single day? You learn how to get past that, right? You learn how to talk about the things that are going on. Talk about things that aren't like necessarily work related or child related, but you just continue to learn about one another. And sometimes what we need to do is we need a refresher that lets us sit down in front of the people that we love and just say, I'm going to list your positive qualities. Let me tell you about the things that I love about you. And do that with your children as well. When you are most upset with your children, sit down and write a list of all the things that you love about them. When you are most upset or most frustrated with your husband or your wife, sit down and say, I'm going to list 10 things that I love about you. Not just the physical things, but go deep, go very specific. List those positive qualities. Talk about your history. Talk about the things that you've done together, the lives that you've lived. When something happens in life that reminds you, don't just kind of think of it and laugh, but say, hey, you remember that time that we were camping and it was so cold that we both tried to squeeze in that one sleeping bag that we brought? Like, we went camping over my birthday in the Wichita Mountain State Park, and it was cold. And we were in a tent, and we were laying there, and it's like, I was in jeans, Heather was in jeans. I think we were wearing 2 sweatshirts. I'm pretty sure I slept in shoes. And we were both zipped up into this Bass Pro Shop sleeping bag. I was skinnier then. I don't know if we could both fit in that sleeping bag now. I take up a little more space than I did, but I was 165 pounds, and I could squeeze into that little sleeping bag. And talk about your history. Don't just think of it and don't let it pass. Talk about those moments with your kids. Tell your story to your kids. Give them a chance and a space to ask and to sit and listen to the places that you've been together, the things that you've done, even if the places you've been are just across town. I love telling the story of our honeymoon. Our honeymoon was, I would make you guess, it was exotic. We went to Turner Falls in South Oklahoma. That was almost 55 minutes from our house. And we left early. We went to Turner Falls one day. We went to Arbuckle Wilderness the next day. We watched Batman and Robin at a movie theater in Ardmore, Oklahoma. And we got a free stuffed crust pizza because we were on our honeymoon. And we got after day 2. I was like, you want to go back to Turner Falls? She's like, not really. It's like, what do you want to do? And she's like, well, we got some money for the wedding. Let's go back to Oklahoma City and go to Whitewater Bay and not tell anybody we came home. I was like, yes. And so we went to Whitewater Bay. It's a water park. And our kids would go, really? That was your honeymoon? It's like, yep, that was our honeymoon. It tells a story. It tells a story about where we were in our life, about the things that we had. But I wouldn't change it for the world. And we laugh about it. And the cool thing is, when we were driving the kids back and forth from Texas, from Austin to Oklahoma City to visit family, we would pass exit 51 on I-35 every single time that we went. And every time we would pass, we would go, there's our exit. And Saturday, guess where we're going with Jody? Turner Falls. We get to go back and experience it all the time. And I don't know if that's why she picked it. She probably just picked it because we passed by it and we pointed out all the time. It's not a very pretty waterfall. It says it's a massive waterfall, but the water actually only falls a little bit, but they count it from the very top. The cabin that I rented wasn't ready when we got there, so we stayed in the inn, and then they moved us to the cabin, and I wish they would have kept us in the inn because the cabin was horrible. The little inn was better. But we tell those stories. This is maybe the biggest challenge for me is practice the positive thinking aspect, or practice positive thinking. We live in a world and we are tempted and surrounded by things that are so negative. I mean, this is my least favorite span of a 4-year period. Election time, right? I mean, that year of election, everything's about politics and it's all negative. And I mean, he said, she said, I mean, you're just bombarded with it. But we live in a very negative culture, and that negativity can come into our lives. It can come into the way that we talk to each other. It can come into the way that we talk to our kids. It comes into the way that we talk to our friends. You know, and I experience this as guys especially. I mean, most guys, our love language, not to receive, but to give, is to give little jabs. Hey, pansy, what's going on? Like, what was that? That was terrible. Nice shot. You better eat your Wheaties. Is that all you got? And we even have a phrase that we used often when I was growing up. It was like, hey, man, if I'm not putting you down, I don't really love you. Like, that's hogwash. Even if it's true, like, we need to find a better way to express our love for each other. Like, hey, we need to be each other's cheerleader. Biggest supporter. There is enough about this world that's going to tear you down and bring you the negativity. We need to be the people that bring the positivity into the lives of the people that are around us. Your husband and your wife should never be the brunt of your joke, privately or publicly. Your kids should never be the brunt of your joke, privately or publicly. Positive thinking. That's what I want. I'm working. I'm getting there. I hope I'm getting there. Got a long ways to go. But I hope that someday someone will look at me and say, oh, Josh, man, I know that guy. That guy is the most positive guy I've ever known. Like, he always has something good to say about somebody. I'm not there yet. But we're going to get there because we're going to keep practicing positive thinking. And really just intentionally touch the people you love every time you pass one another. And be intentional about it. And let each other know. It's like, hey, I need a high five. I need something. I need you to know that I'm here. Because the more that you are in contact with each other, the harder it is to allow those little annoyances to become points of resentment. All right. Well, let's say a prayer. God, we thank you for the day that you've given to us. We thank you for the time that we have to be here. We thank you for your love and your faithfulness and the privilege that we have to be a part of your family in the church. but also the responsibility we have of raising our own families here. We pray that your Spirit would be present in the families that are represented in this room, in this church, and for those outside of this place, that not only would we be an example, but we would be an avenue through which the people around us would come to know you better. They would grow and mature in their relationships and in their knowledge of you. We pray, God, that we would have the wisdom and the discernment to just stop and think before we respond, that we would be a people of grace, that we would be a people who are constantly expressing the positive nature of life in you, that we would see that goodness in other people and we would call it out. Not that we would just ignore those difficult things about the people in our lives, but we would be shaped by the positive aspects of those relationships. We thank you for Jesus, the bond we have in him. It's in his name we pray. Amen.